Welcome, everyone. We're going to give a minute for everybody to come in and get settled. We paused our conversation about Halloween costumes and parents who enjoy Halloween more than children. So hope everyone had a very happy Halloween last night, maybe suffering from a little candy hangover or any kind of hangover that you may be suffering from this morning. Whatever it is, no judgment here. Your video's off, so come as you are for this important discussion. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday, happy November, or in other words, it's basically already 2024. So happy New Year. Happy New Year, everyone. I don't know. Welcome to Mediavine's guided discussion on the value of independent publishers. Thank you for joining us today as some of the top industry voices weigh in on this important topic. I'm Jenny Guy, Mediavine's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for what promises to be an action-packed discussion. We appreciate everyone who submitted terrific questions in advance. Our goal is to cover as much ground as we can in our limited time. You'll notice that you're muted and the chat function is disabled, so please drop any of your questions for our panelists on this topic into the Q&A function, and we'll share them with the panelists as we have time towards the end of the discussion. All right, housekeeping out of the way. What immediately comes to your mind when I say the long tail? What associations do you have with the phrase? How about the words independent publishers? In today's discussion, we've gathered experts from across the industry to weigh in on what we stand to gain when we invest in this inventory and what we stand to lose if we don't. So let's dive in and meet this highly impressive panel. I'm going to start out with Chris Kane. Jounce Media is the industry leader in programmatic supply chain management and is trusted by the world's largest marketers, media companies, and advertising technology platforms to enable high-efficiency programmatic trades. Chris Kane founded Jounce Media in 2015. He was previously the chief of staff to the CEO and CFO at AOL. Prior to AOL, Chris managed a portfolio of enterprise accounts at Turn, a pioneer in the DSP industry. He started his career as a management consultant at Oliver Wyman, where he focused on the converging media and technology sectors. Welcome, Chris. All right. Lara Koenig. She serves as MIQ's global head of product, leading product strategy and partnership development for MIQ's omni-channel advertising capabilities. Over the course of her 8-year tenure with MIQ, Lara has led a variety of high-scale teams across programmatic trading and product development, managing departments of 50+ to deliver best-in-class tech service and advertising innovation for global marketers. Outside of her contributions to MIQ, which are clearly sizable, Lara has influenced the wider ad tech industry through participation in cross-industry working groups, serving as an evangelist for publisher development and fostering education and standards for buy-side supply path optimization. Amanda Martin currently serves as Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Business Strategy at Mediavine. In this role, Amanda is a key member of the company's leadership team, overseeing revenue strategies, key partnerships, and brand activation opportunities across all business units. With over a decade of experience on the buy side, Amanda will help Mediavine evaluate the current market and competitive intelligence to identify strategic collaborations and growth opportunities. Prior to joining Mediavine, Amanda was the SVP of Corporate Development and Strategic Partnerships at Goodway Group. Additionally, Martin led Goodway Group's Center of Excellence, which consists of skilled professionals across programmatic, convergent TV, search, social, commerce, and measurement focused on performance outcomes. And finally, Rocky Moss. Rocky has always understood digital advertising through the lens of traffic quality and IVT. His first job in the industry was as a traffic quality specialist at Conversant, and he threw himself into the work of understanding how IVT detection worked. It was there he started noticing the strategies that some publishers use to acquire inorganic traffic, which tests clean for IVT. And that started him digging into how those blind spots could be accounted for. He next spent 4 years with an MRC accredited vendor developing IVT detection algorithms for mobile and CTV traffic. His discoveries and research revealed much that was unknown about app spoofing and publisher fraud in those environments. Still, there was always a desire to step away from tag-based tracking solutions and develop an experiential approach to measuring publisher risk. Since co-founding DeepSea, Rocky has devoted his energy to shining light on the low quality publishers that plague the programmatic ecosystem, and understanding how the worst sites on the web are connected to the sites that advertisers spend their money on. We have a very high caliber panel today, and we're going to jump right in. But before we get into some of our questions, I think it would be helpful for the audience and for myself as well to define what the long tail is when it comes to digital advertising. And I'm going to actually kick off with Rocky. We're going to have every panelist weigh in on this.
Sure. To me, the immediate thing I think of when I think of the long tail is stuff that doesn't have immediate name brand recognition. Like these are the things that you would, the ComScore Top 500 is mostly composed of brands that have existing, strong name recognition from transitioning from print media perhaps to now the digital age. And the long tail is a lot more digital first type publishers, I'd say, and ones that have been around probably less time than the incumbent, top 500.
Excellent answer. All right. I see Amanda nodding. We'll toss over to her next.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think the reality is that the internet is vast, and to find your audiences from the buy and the sell side gives you a lot of opportunity. So that digital first long tail is really, the content creators, the bloggers, the place you find your recipe to cook dinner at night. It can be extensive, and then it can go into made for advertising and sites that exist only to create ad experiences for consumers. So I think it truly is kind of everything outside the ComScore top 500, and that means a lot of different things, and some are great and some are truly things you should avoid. And so I think that's what we're going to dig into today.
Absolutely. Okay, we said MFA, so I'm going to call on Chris Kane next.
Sure, I think we're probably all converging on a similar definition here. I guess the way that I would think of this is maybe from the perspective of a media buyer, a hands-on keyword DSP trader. I think of the long tail as the sites that they would never inspect individually. So you're going to inspect the yahoo.com, which is going to be the first thing in your delivery report. You're going to inspect CNN, which is the third or fourth thing in your delivery report. And at some point, I don't know, like site 1000, you're just no longer rationally going to take the time as a buyer to sort of apply human oversight. And so to me, that's where the long tail starts. And to put some math around that, for the average campaign, the top 100 sites capture about half of spend. Top 1,000 sites capture 80% of spend. And so it's sort of the last 20% of spend or so is long tail inventory that is just too small to warrant human oversight.
We brought in the robots. Laura, hop in.
I'd agree on all of that. It's names of websites that you as a consumer don't natively recognize. Maybe it's a site you visited once but didn't pay attention to the URL. So a brand won't recognize that either. So long tail for us is any site that really isn't getting past an inclusion list from a brand or an agency. So you kind of have to argue to justify the value of. And as Chris mentioned, it's anything kind of past row 500 in your Excel sheet where there's not enough spend for an individual buyer to really sort of get the value out of inspecting that. So a mix of all the answers, but I think it's definitely an interesting topic to dive into.
All right. Thank you for level setting there. And Laura, I'm going to continue with you. Why is there a reluctance from brand marketers to buy on that long tail? And you've already started to dive into it a bit, one, just from a sense of scale and that Excel spreadsheet, the scrolling finger gets tired. But beyond that, will you give us a little more?
Yeah, I think for marketers, it's about trust. There's implicit trust in websites that they recognize or publishers that they recognize, again, as consumers themselves. You don't really have to argue the value of a Condé Nast with a brand marketer, but bobsauto.com or a lot of sort of niche cooking or gardening sites they've personally never heard of. So there's perceived risk in terms of controlling what content's on that page. Increasingly, there's perceived risk around the ad quality experience of that page as well. The worst thing a brand marketer wants to get is have their social team see a tweet about a bad ad placement or a broken ad or an ill-placed ad. So a lot of marketers feel that it's better to just cut out that risk entirely, even if there is some ROI to be found in that bottom 20%, as Chris mentioned. So what we really try to do is extract kind of the valuable within that long tail as a and then highlight that there is a way to navigate it and cut out some of the risk.
Thank you for that answer. Rocky, I'm going to, same question to you.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of sort of reacting to reports that have come out, such as the ANA study showed, average 40,000 or something sites that a marketer's on running in the open web. And sort of like as a knee-jerk reaction to that, you might expect people cut off the long tail and they only want to focus on the sites that they know have, reputation on name alone. Like some of the people that we work with, one of the benefits they get out of vetting the list, there are tools, is that they then feel comfortable showing the delivery reports to their clients. So I think that is sort of the force pushing people to avoid the long tail, is that they want to feel comfortable in that, and they don't want that egg on their face. And I think it's just like Lara said, that like they don't want to see the screenshot of something bad that happened, on the campaign during the run. And so naturally, I think the easiest way, if you don't have a lot of resources to vet the long tail, using whatever tools you feel comfortable with, then you're just going to contract your site list and work with more obviously high reputation pubs.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with you on that. So as you were saying, there's that element of fear of not wanting to be caught with, as you said, egg on your face, going viral for an unfortunate experience on Twitter X. I'm not going, it's Twitter. But do we need to consider different quality risk signals for the long tail? It's natural that these newer sites will have less organic discoverability than well-established ones, both from a just literal tenure of how long they've existed on the web, but also from the offline, the analog brand recognition of seeing, Kellogg's or McCormick. They have that inherent discoverability. So what signals can be taken from the content user experience alone that could inspire buyer confidence?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because one of the things we have seen as a criteria for MFA sites has been discussed as length, is source traffic rate. I think the problem in the long tail is not so much that you see source traffic, it's that you just don't know how people are getting there for the most part. Maybe someone like Mediavine, like as part of the onboarding, they get access to Google Analytics, but most marketers are not going to see data like that. They're just going to see maybe like 30 days delayed similar web data, maybe, if that's the tool they use, or they'll see majestic backlinks profiles. But new sites tend to have just sort of like less everything, like less backlinks, fewer backlinks rather, and all that stuff. So I think, like you were sort of leading the question, it is important then to understand the quality of the content and the user experience. User experience, there's some pretty good hard and fast rules we can look to here. It's like, how much of the space on the page is occupied by ads? Okay, we can count that. What's the refresh timing? Okay, we can count that. But I think especially in the long tail, the uniqueness of the content is really important. There are a lot of sites that are now coming up. They exist only to sort of repurpose content that exists out there. And we really need to find a way to incentivize new and interesting content, because I think that's one of the great sort of promises of independent publishing. If you have a good idea, you can put it out there. Which is, how do we surface the good ideas faster than we surface the sites made by people who are just really good at promoting their site? Like that's the kind of the forces we're dealing with here.
Great. I actually am going to go jump to Amanda. I saw her nodding when Rocky was talking about the vetting and the type of vetting that we have. So I was going to actually have her jump in and talk about some of what we can do at Mediavine, because we work with that long tail.
Yeah, ultimately I was previously on the buy side. That's how I became exposed to Mediavine. And we were always looking from a buy side perspective, and I'm sure Lara feels the same way, at controlling our spend. Where is it going? Are we going to be happy where it's going? Are we proud of where it's going? And we didn't want to cut off the long tail, but we wanted to do it in a very systematic way to ensure that we were serving our brands correctly. And so the reason why I joined Mediavine was because I feel like offerings like Mediavine can give brands that extended metrics and brand safety controls that maybe they don't have the time and resources to go down a 40,000 website list. And the reality is buyers are not going to go that far. They don't have to go that far. If they can get to the 80% of their spend, like that's where they're going to stop. And Mediavine has the opportunity to vet the publishers that they let into their network. We let far less than apply into our network. And so we go through the steps like Rocky's outlining. Where do they source their traffic? How many ads do they have on their site? One of the first steps is we often decrease the number of ads on their sites, because they've actually made themselves less viable to the buy side, because they've created an experience that doesn't look like it showcases the content that Rocky was talking about. And so I think it is on the publisher's role to play a vetting process of their own. How does their site show up to the buy side? What are their metrics? What are their refresh rates? Like, we have to be good governors of quality supply so that buyers can have confidence in it. And I think that's what Mediavine does for independent publishers, because the buy side does not have the capability to go all the way down the long tail. It's not feasible. It's not effective for them, quite frankly, to do so.
Appreciate that perspective. And I'm going to open that up. So from every panelist perspective, how can we back these valuable independent publishers for the diverse open web while dodging the low quality opportunistic sites, the scrapers? I'm going to start with Chris Kane on that one.
Well, I think what Rocky in particular was getting at is sort of like a debate about like what's the right barrier to entry. And my view is it's been too low for the last 10 years. Like, it's just too easy to enter the programmatic advertising category from the sell side and capture DSP ads. But there's also, for sure, you could swing that pendulum back too far in the other direction and create a barrier to entry that's too high. And I think that there have been some examples of that where marketers have this sort of like moment of fear where there is the screenshot that Lara was sort of referencing before that floats around on social media. It's like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Like, look, tighten it up. We're only running on 100 sites. Well, that barrier to entry is too high, because the reality is like the household name publishers that have like a print history are not the future of the web. They're probably not even the current state of the web. Like, the reality of the web is you want to find a chili recipe and you find one on a website you've never heard of, but it's a great piece of content. Like, that is the current state of the web. That's going to be the future of the web. And so like what I'm driving at is I think media buyers are wrestling with how do I appropriately find the right barrier to entry so that I am reaching into what we're calling the long tail here, but that I'm protecting my investments from opportunistic publishers that aren't creating any value. And I realize we're here on a panel hosted by Mediavine, but I really do think like the structural solution to this problem, whether it's Mediavine or somebody else, is companies who are going to bet large companies who are going to bet their reputations on the quality of inventory they represent. There's so much more downside to whether it's Mediavine or one of your competitors. There's so much more downside to letting in one bad publisher than the revenue upside, that these companies start to become a signal for quality in the long tail.
Appreciate that answer. Lara, I'm going to have you weigh in there.
Yeah, I think I'd build on that. So from a buy side perspective, like what we hope will happen across not only our own investment, but also the good ways and the holding companies of the world is that buyers start to look to more data sources to help them validate this, as opposed to doing just broad blocks and only running on the top 100. I think we all recognize there is value in the long tail or, below the 500 domain cutoff. But buyers don't have a lot of data to access it. So increasing sort of cross-industry knowledge shares across what data sources to use, starting to trust more independent publishing sort of aggregators like a Mediavine to start providing that data to buyers around here's how we've actually vetted and the signals that we look at would be step one. Step two for buyers, I think, would be starting to really put their dollars to work in terms of saying what they will and will not accept. I think if sort of all the holding companies and large agencies combined started saying, hey, no, we won't buy sticky players. If you refresh more than every 5 seconds, we won't buy your site. If there's more than 10 ads on a page, we won't buy it. I think if buyers really leaned into saying these are our quality standards and then back that with investment, that would help publishers kind of understand what a good quality experience is for both consumers and advertisers and give them kind of an out to stop some of the poor ad quality placements or, the more nefarious actors. It would give them a higher barrier to entry, as Chris noted. So I think those are two things that the buy side can really do to try to give value back to publishers. But definitely agree with everyone else in terms of how we can get value up.
If I could just jump in on what Lara was just saying,
Please.
there's like a very complicated practical reality, and Rocky, you can probably speak to this in more detail. But there's like all these ad tech companies have policies, like what their standards are. That's true on the sell side of the market and the buy side. They can't actually enforce that in any credible way deep into the long tail. They just can't. And so there's some notion here that I think ad tech companies understandably are reluctant to talk about, but there's just some notion of like, how confident are we that this inventory meets our company's standards? And like, you can be very confident about that if you're talking about a gigantic publisher, because you can spend the time to look at their individual site. You can feel confident about them looking at a large portfolio, like a Hearst Magazines or a Condé Nast. Like, they operate one way, and you can probably be reasonably confident about that for a company like Mediavine. You just can't practically do that for like a standalone site that's, the 10,000th largest site on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's, from buy side perspective, that's why we work with sort of the aggregation of the publishers. Like, we're never going to individually email 1,000 different domain owners to get them to improve their ad quality experience. But if there is, an independent trusted source that helps us aggregate those, we're a lot more confident that if we enforce our quality standards that way, that they can sort of help impact it downstream. So I do think that longer term, for the value of a future open web, a lot of independent publishers are going to have to buddy up with folks like Mediavine and others in order to start to meet, stricter buy side criteria if advertisers start to put their investment to work here.
Yeah, so
Laura, go
was
ahead,
gonna
Rocky, please. Yeah.
and on top, sometimes, doing the job I do, it sometimes feels like there are enough websites. Like, what is a website that's created tomorrow gonna add to the global conversation? Like, do we need another site that's gonna regurgitate the news? I think that's my own pessimism allowed to creep in, but I do think, and what's more frustrating is that we see that site, garnering some amount of ad impressions, and it almost always seems like sort of a chicken and an egg problem. Like, no one would allow that site with no reputation onto its platform. Like, the Mediavines of the world who, curate the portfolio aggressively. There's always an entry point that's self-serve. That's what I find is like, for the sites to, that you don't want sucking up ad dollars to actually end up doing it. Most of the time they enter via some sort of self-serve avenue. Maybe like you look at their ads.txt file and it's just one single Google pub ID. Like, that is extremely common. We see that all the time. And it sort of seems, and they have to do that kind of like to build a reputation of like, hey, I have monetized my site for X amount of months. Now I can go to Mediavine. Now I can go to someone who is waiting for me to have a history of performance. And without that, then they, enter into the ecosystem through self-serve. And I think there needs to be there have been so many research pieces come out showing how, like, I don't know, for example, the GVP research that analytics put out, that's a self-serve marketplace. There were a lot of quality issues that people didn't know about. And I think that is just always going to happen categorically, no matter what sort of automated systems you use, no matter if you use DeepSeek, if you use SimilarWeb, if you use Majestic, eventually, if you have self-serve platform, something is going to happen that is not a great quality.
Yeah, and I think, even as much as we vet our sites, like, we're even interested about how our sites show up in DeepSeek. It's why we have relationships with Chris and with Rocky, because we also want to ensure that the sites we have vetted maintain that level of quality, that there aren't changes that happen, without our knowledge, that we're monitoring that on a regular basis. And I think the data points that Chris and Rocky's companies have brought to light will help empower both the buy side and the sell side make beneficial decisions on what is quality in the programmatic ecosystem. But I also think that it is on the DSPs to start enforcing what they let into their platforms and allow buyers to even have the option to buy. We're starting to see some of that, but when I started on the SPO journey, Chris and I have been talking about SPO for years, and I'm like, this is definitely all the buy side. Like, the buyers have to control this. And I think, Lara, you would agree, you want a strong hand in it, but you want your DSP partners to also act on your behalf and not let nefarious inventory in to gobble up your budgets accidentally. And so I think there's a role that the DSPs need to play in this to protect, revenue from flowing to places that it just should never find to begin with. So I think some of that 20% could be blocked out before a buyer even has to contemplate it. And I think that's where we're moving, but we're moving slowly there. So that's why Lara does all her additional checks and balances, and Mediavine does their additional checks and balances to ensure that if and when those broad reaching changes are implemented on a DSP, we're on the right side of history.
I was all very great contributions. I appreciate that. Rocky, I was just going to add to just to refute your pessimism with a bit of optimism here on why we need an additional website. I think that one of the things, for better or worse, that we've discovered with the internet is if there's someone that was willing to post content about it, there's a lot of people that are going to read it, which is both wonderful and terrifying. So it's such a great equalizer. We have so many, the niches are staggering what people will read and consume. So I think there will always be a new topic niche and people who and then buyers who want to reach the demographic of people that are reading that content. So
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's our job sort of as the supply side curators to make sure that there is sort of like, something new added to the conversation when a new site comes up. That's basically my concern, that it's like, this is contributing to, humanity's furtherment, to be dramatic, but sort of just like really adding new knowledge, new perspective to the conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Circling back to MFA, there was quite a lot of commentary industry-wide in June when that ANA report came out saying that the MFA websites represented 21% of impressions and 15% of all ad spend. How can the industry responsibly identify made for advertising without harming legitimate and reputable publishers? I'm going to have Chris weigh in there.
I mean, I think the short answer to that is the bar has to be really, really high. There are publishers that clearly, obviously meet all of the very sort of guidance that the ANA and other industry bodies have put out about what constitutes MFA. There are publishers that clearly are nowhere near that line, but there's a bunch of publishers that are in this gray area, and that's a scary situation for publishers who may think like, I don't know, like I don't have the household name recognition, I haven't been recognized in industry as like the most premier publisher on the internet, and like I don't think I'm an MFA publisher, but maybe I am, maybe I'm being incorrectly flagged. And I think publishers have a history of that sort of like explains a rational fear response. They have a history of being blocked on the basis of black box brand safety filters or black box IVT filters or a variety of other black box. I get it. Like I understand why publishers are concerned here. And I think the solve is some combination of having a very high standard for what you consider to be MFA, and not taking action based on anecdotes and not blocking publishers that are in the gray area, and being very transparent. Like this can't be like brand safety where it's some like mysterious thing of this site, this page appears to be blocked, but the publisher can't figure out why or validate if that's true or not. Like it needs to be easy for publishers to know, have you been identified by some trusted source as made for advertising? And I'm optimistic that's going to happen. Like I feel like the industry learned some lessons and publishers should have this data easily available. But yeah, there's a risk that there's false positives here. Publishers should, publishers are justified to be concerned about that.
Anybody
I could
want to
jump
weigh
in there.
Oh, Laura, please.
Yeah, I think just from the buy side, the biggest thing that's been helpful is to actually like start to share different lists of what constitutes MSA across the industry. So like MIQ sharing their list with Jounce Media. We also, got it from SSPs, and there was a slightly different categorization across every single partner. And the real value for us came out when we were actually having calls and debating whether certain sites were or were not MFA, because that helps bridge together like a stricter definition for us. So I think more collaboration across the buy and sell, and more transparency to Chris mentioning, like we should raise our hand and say like, yes, this is MFA, and give publishers an opportunity to solve it and get off the block list.
Yeah, Amanda, I saw some vigorous nodding.
Yeah, I think it's the work together. And I think, for example, like Lara and I can meet and discuss and maybe be like, oh, okay, let's curate what part of our portfolio matches a specific brand's requirements. And that's the other thing that we don't talk about a lot, is that on the buy side, it's not just that MIQ has a standard, it's that all the brands that work with MIQ have a standard. And so they're different. And so one advertiser thinks this is the threshold and another advertiser thinks this threshold is somewhere else. And that's a lot of navigating to do. And I think that's where the buy side and the sell side have to get together, compare lists, understand, and have discussions about, I think we're mislabeled here, or, okay, we'll clean that up and we'll adjust that strategy. I think that's starting to actually happen now, because I think the jerk reaction of cutting out the long tail is a very scary one because it cuts out diverse voices. And I think that's why, you know, folks like the ANA have like the DE&I efforts that they have right now. It's because they realize like, okay, if you only buy from the ComScore top 200 or 500, you're not supporting diversely owned publishers, and you're cutting out voices that are incredibly important for the open internet. So how do we empower the right voices and disempower the bad actors? And I think it's the buy and sell side getting closer together, which Chris and Laura have hinted towards.
Great answer. Made for advertising sites, MFAs as a topic, have recently commanded a lot of space in the conversation around inventory quality. At the same time, there's been a surging interest in attention metrics. Are these metrics potentially an answer to the MFA problem? Are they superior to metrics like viewability or video complete rates for identifying poor ad placements in this context, Lara?
I think it could be a step in the right direction. In general, like more metrics to speak towards quality are better. And particularly with viewability and video completion rates, I think we've seen that those have already been gamed a little bit in the ecosystem. So those alone aren't metrics we look at when we're determining quality. In fact, a lot of MFA sites are the best for viewability and video completion rates. I think there's a risk that emerging measurement like attention can be gamed as well. So I think the partners that sort of are introducing those to the ecosystem need to be really vigilant in their models in terms of looking at quality and across the board. I think one of the limitations we potentially see is that a lot of those partners rely on tag-based measurements, so they're only getting past what's passed in the bid stream, which doesn't include a lot of things like refresh rates or, you know, ad density on the site. And so I think attention could be part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. And I think, again, to speak on collaboration, hopefully a lot of those partners are starting to look across the buy and sell side to gain additional data sets to help them understand quality beyond just what's passed in the ad call.
Excellent. We're actually going to drop in here with a question from our audience. Curious to hear more about Chris's delineation between made for advertising and not conflating it with brand safety measures, particularly as these do impact the diverse sites as Amanda was speaking to.
So I think the point that I was trying to make, which maybe I can make more clearly here, is simply that publishers should expect that they can get clarity about whether their inventory is currently flagged as MFA. And should be able to just like get a clear answer, not to pay for it. Like that should just be information that's available. And what I was trying to do is sort of like paint that as different from the way that brand safety works today. Publishers, to my knowledge, don't have any good mechanism to understand how different vendors classify the brand safety, brand suitability of their inventory. MFA can't be like that. That's the point I was trying to make. I think the other interesting point in here is, you know, the overlap of MFA classifications with diverse owned media companies. And I've heard some concerns in industry that MFA blocklists may disproportionately harm diverse owned media businesses. And, you know, that's a real concern that needs to be taken pretty seriously. We've looked into that quite closely. We maintain a list of about 6,000 websites with diverse ownership. And so just as a headline that hopefully creates a little bit of reassurance, 0.2% of the bid requests on those sites we currently classify as MFA. 20% of bid requests on the rest of the web we classify as MFA. And so, at least based on our analysis, diverse owned media is 100 times less likely to be classified as MFA as the rest of the web.
That's a great answer. I'm actually going to open up another question. Here for it's an anonymous question. It says, aren't all publisher sites that monetize with ads made for advertising? So I just want to jump in here, and I think it could be effective to talk about specifically what MFA signifies to this panel. Would anyone like to hop in first? I think that we have Rocky says yes with a peace sign. Hop in.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the rhetoric around made for advertising, I mean, it's obvious to make a point like that. I think the name made for advertising is terrible, and I never started writing about what is now called MFA under that pseudonym. I saw when the ANA put out their criteria for flagging it, they notably said, we're calling this made for arbitrage. I always saw it as a subset of arbitrage that's specifically, it's just, sort of economics at work. It's called that. It borrows the arbitrage from financial markets because it's really just sort of playing the market against itself. You can buy traffic cheaper than you can sell it. If that is the core of the business model, then it's MFA. If you incidentally acquire traffic during normal operations and you actually are sort of, employing a multitude of journalists, or you even are an independent publisher writing the content, or you have a few writers, like that's, I don't think you'd be flagged MFA on that basis. At any rate, what we're talking about is like arbitrage in my mind. Like if you want to set a line as an advertiser or a DSP around ad density and refresh rates, but alone on each of those signals on their own is strong. You can do that. No one's going to fault you for that. I think what we're calling MFA now is a subset of arbitrage.
And you don't even have to change the acronym conveniently. So
Yes, very convenient.
Yeah. I would also add that I think where you get into that gray area is when you're a smaller publisher that's not repped by like a publishing house, more ads on your page equal more revenue. And so that is where sites that are like truly independent content creators kind of blur themselves into an ad density problem by accident because if I put another ad, I make more money. And if I put another ad, I make more money. And if I put another ad, I make more money. And then eventually they hit a threshold that gets them onto a block list. And that's where it becomes an issue. And so I think one thing that we often do to educate publishers is the ad experience on your site is truly a concern for the brands and the agencies who are buying your site. And that is where poorly managed ad experiences blur into looking like arbitrage. And I think that is where Chris is saying publishers can figure out if they're being flagged as MFA and they can correct it by the structure of their sites if they're not truly arbitrage sites. I think there's efforts there.
If I can just connect what Amanda said to what Rocky said, I think, Amanda, you're saying there's just maybe quantifiably, certainly qualitatively, just like junky sites on the internet. And I think Rocky's saying like, yep, that's a thing. And buyers are well within their rights to block junky sites on the internet. But that's not made for advertising. Made for advertising is a narrow, specific thing, which is an ad arbitrage business model where the arbitrage math only works because you create an incredibly aggressive advertising experience. And I think Rocky said it perfectly. I have nothing to add to the description other than to say like MFA, I think, has become a well-defined thing in the industry. And I hope publishers recognize that it's a narrow definition that is specifically related to an ad arbitrage business model.
appreciate that. Okay, we have one more reader question that we were going to jump in on, which is from James String. Is Microsoft's new self-serve ad product to compete with AdSense going to help balance the ecosystem or going to be another aggregator of trash inventory? We'll start out with Rocky on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add besides that I am generally distrustful of self-serve onboarding for the sell side. It's often a doorway to sort of like more abuse down the line, or maybe it's innocuous in like 90% of cases, but unfortunately it will sort of open the door to some undesirable actors. And I think really there have to be you have to do continual monitoring, like very aggressively if you're going to do that. And you have to sort of like, especially be vigilant in these periods where third-party data is going to be hard to come by because it's a very new publisher, or maybe just set a higher standard for onboarding if it's a self-serve product, or it's like, we will not accept you until we can like verify from XYZ tools that you have a history of operating in good faith. I think that is a fight. Like you can start a website one day and the next day you're not entitled to make money off it. Like it may feel that way, but I think there will be a lot tougher gating requirements on self-serve products if they want to continue into like, the next generation of ad tech, or else they'll just be seen as trash.
Got to pay your dues. Amanda, hop in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's definitely an area of opportunity to improve what gets onboarded through self-service platforms. And I think you can't, to Rocky's point, you're not gonna be able to judge a new product offering until you see what inventory it brings into the marketplace and what vetting they do and how qualified of a process they have, which is what is going to put Lara in a position to have to figure out, a new source of inventory and if they trust it or not. I think there's an area of opportunity because there are some really great small sites out there, like some fantastic small sites, but I think it is a hard offering to tackle if the goal is to monetize on day one. And I think there's an opportunity to be had to bring smaller sites into safe ecosystems, but I don't know that we have those solutions currently in market present day, as they're set up more to monetize quickly versus have quality over quantity.
Appreciate that. Okay, we are going to head into our final question here for the panelists. This has been a really great discussion, but Rocky, I think, alluded to it a little earlier, but we're talking big picture question because we can't help have that conversation with this topic. Looking ahead, what do you want the internet to look like in 5 years? And what role does the ad industry at large and each of your organizations specifically play in making it happen when you vote with your dollars? And I think we'll start with Rocky on that one.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it's no secret that there's just a proliferation of long tail sites, especially with the consumer readiness of AI, generative AI products. And I think if we're not careful, the internet will just kind of turn into the result of who's able to make the most money on their websites. And if that isn't, people with something interesting and new to say, I keep falling back to that point. But if we just allow I guess let me bring it back 1 second. I have had a lot of conversations about generative AI, and I do think it highly relates to the future of the advertising industry. A lot of people don't care about this sort of AI generated sites if it is informationally accurate and people are getting what they're looking for, right? I think if we kind of allow that to happen, then we're just sort of working towards an internet that's entirely dictated by capital, not really sort of worried about providing readers with new and interesting information. That is not what I want to see happen, I guess, the short answer to your question. I want to see independent voices be elevated and be sort of, financially remunerated for their efforts. Maybe that means because they're working with a partner like Mediavine who helps them elevate, their high quality website that may be in the long tail, or maybe because there's some yet unforeseen solution that arrives on the scene. But we're definitely in sort of an existential place where we're either going to sort of optimize towards who can create the most sites with the most, seemingly accurate information, or who can find a way to help independent publishers monetize their websites in the long term.
Great answer. Lara.
Yeah, I think for me, the idealistic future of the internet is a web experience that has equal value for marketers, publishers, and consumers. Where I think, when a user lands on a page, the user isn't overwhelmed by ads that forces them to install an ad blocker, and then the publisher loses the revenue. I think the way we're going with Gen AI generated websites and then sort of independent publishers then having to do similar tactics to recoup their revenue. I think we're barreling towards a future where the consumer experience is getting worse, and so more and more ad blockers will get installed. And I think that means really bad things for the open internet. And it potentially means okay things for, the top 5 big tech companies. So ideally in the future, we find a balance of ad experience, consumer opt-in, that gives brands feeling good around they're not pissing off their consumers with ads. It helps publishers feel good because they're still monetizing their independent, legitimate content that they've created. And then it helps consumers feel good that they're not having a shit experience or that their data is not being violated. That's my sunny pasture future. And I think, as you mentioned, we've got to start voting with our dollars, at least from the buy side and investment side, to get that to materialize, sort of punish the bad actors and start to reward the good.
Appreciate that. I would happily live in your idealized internet future. Thank you for laying that out. Chris, Kane.
I think the basic market forces as they're evolving is going to drive buyers to, whether buyer means DSP or agency or individual brand, it's going to drive buyers toward inclusion lists. And the fallout of that is that the big publishers will be fine. And probably the really little ones, the independent content creators, will be fine too, because they'll find a home with Mediavine or somewhere else. But I think two other things fall out of it, of companies that won't be fine. I think the suspicious long tail won't be fine, which is great. That's a really good thing for the internet. Like the stuff that Rocky was touching on before, there probably isn't much of a viable economic future for those businesses. That's a good thing. That's like a self-reinforcing dynamic for the industry. But the concerning one is mid-market publishers are going to have a really rough go. It's going to be really, really hard to be a small, independent media company. And it's not clear to me what happens there, but those are the publishers that are at risk of not being part of the future of the open internet, that I think we'd all want to be part of the future of the open internet. And it's not clear to me how you solve that as a mid-market publisher unless you either merge with a big publisher or join a sales house. And those are both pretty unattractive options for mid-market publishers. So that's the one that I'm concerned about. But I would say that, you know, basically raising the barrier to entry by marketers moving to an inclusion list is gonna, you know, you're gonna break some eggs along the way, but like that's a generally healthy thing, and it's gonna make the internet more along the lines of what Lara was describing, even if some companies get harmed along the way.
Okay. Amanda, close us out.
I don't want to repeat what other great panelists have said, but I think there's more unknown than known at this point. I think we have a drive right now in our industry with privacy and regulation that should be teaching our industry to put the consumer and the visitor to the website and to the brand experience first. And my hope, my idealistic world would be that our industry would start leading with technology advancements for that end consumer versus everybody in the middle. And that if we created really great advertising experiences, the bad actors wouldn't win, and the consumers would win as well. So I guess I align with all the other panelists, but I would also say that there are concerning points to Chris and Rocky's points of places we could turn or pivot points that we could go that would harm some of the greatest parts of the open internet, or could turn us into an automation machine that doesn't give the end consumer the fantastic content that the open internet was made to give them. So I think it's our responsibility over the next 5 years to work together as key players in the ecosystem to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's a huge hurdle that we're going at right now.
It is a daunting task, not to say the least, but with great minds like this working together, I have optimism about the future. I will live in Lara's future, as I said. All right, everyone, please have a wonderful holiday season. We will see you back again with our guided discussions in 2024. And a huge thank you to our panelists, Amanda, Lara, Rocky, and Chris. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you
for having us.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks.